So from one invasive predator that impacts on ground nesting birds to another, we're now moving to the north of Scotland and going to hear about the Orkney Native Wildlife Project. So this is Sarah Sankey from the RSPB, and Sarah has been, is the area operation manager for the RSPB leading on this project. And Sarah has expertise from other projects developing and delivering eradications globally. So,
indeed.
Yep.
Thank you. Well, I'm beginning to think we had raccoon dogs on Orkney. I think it might be easier. But I also think that one of my big problems has just been sorted because with all the political strife that's been happening around the UK, you'll be aware that Orkney and Shetland used to be owned by Norway. And so there's been a big push that if Scotland becomes independent, then Orkney and Shetland are going back to Norway, and I didn't need to worry about land access. So that's very, very good. So I'm going to be pushing now for independence and shift to Norway. Okay, how many people have been to Orkney before? Great, a fair few people, because I forgot to bring a map. So that's good. Just imagine Orkney in your head. For those that haven't been, Orkney is a group of 70 islands, and it's just off the coast of the north of Scotland. So it's about 8 miles off the coast of Scotland. And stoats are not native on Orkney, so it's a bit of a weird one. They're native around the rest of the UK, but the islands are depauperate in a lot of mammalian predators. So we've got no foxes, we've got no pine martens, we've got no weasels, and we've also got no squirrels of any variety, but that's more to do with trees than anything else. So they didn't swim to Orkney. They can't swim that far. Stoats are known to swim at least 3 kilometres, but they couldn't swim across the Pentland Firth. And the introduction is very recent, and our project is very recent. So we're starting at the beginning of our story here. We're a year into our project. We had a development phase. We've got the same 2 funders. So we've got EU Life. We've even got the same monitor, and NLHF as funders as well. We're a partnership project, so RSPB is leading, but we're partners with SNH and also our local authority, Orkney Islands Council. Where did I get to? So in 9 years, the stoats were first confirmed on Orkney in 2011. In 9 years, they've spread across 225 square miles. So they are an invader. They're not a quiet, non-native species. And we've got 70 islands, so they're on 5 at the moment. So we're actually in a critical position because this species is spreading at the moment, and it's spreading very quickly. For those of you who know about stoats, the females are pretty much always pregnant. They have a delayed pregnancy, so they get impregnated almost at birth, basically, in the nest. So Orkney, the area that's affected in Orkney is 5 islands, is 225 square miles. It is the largest stoat eradication that's been attempted in the world to date. I did get put in my place slightly last night when Craig told me that it's smaller than Anglesey. But never mind, it's still a huge challenge. So I'm going to try and cover a bit about the development phase of the project and also what we've achieved in year 1. So why are we worried? Why are we worried about stoats on Orkney? So we have to look to New Zealand. New Zealand is where we have carried out most stoat eradications, and I have worked in New Zealand before. So about the time when people were bringing grey squirrels over from America, we were shipping thousands of stoats out to New Zealand to control rabbits. So it was in the latter part of the 19th century, and they were going out in their thousands. So there's records from Lincolnshire of about 2,500 stoats alone being shipped out. Goodness knows how many died on the way. And since that time, stoats have devastated their native wildlife. So we heard earlier that invasive species are a huge cause of global extinctions, and the stoat has been implicated in the extinction of species like the bush wren and the laughing owl. So they've gone from the world entirely. And the New Zealanders, furthermore, are predicting if they don't do anything about stoats, in 2 generations, all their kiwi species will have disappeared. But they do know that where they take action and where they've eradicated stoats from smaller islands, they have saved species from extinction. So in Orkney, we don't have quite the same endemic native species, but the islands are about 0.5% of the UK's landmass, and we have about 11% of all the UK seabirds. We have about a quarter of all the hen harriers in the UK breeding on Orkney. A third of the land is designated for very good reasons. We've got the highest density of breeding curlew in Europe. There is a lot to lose if we let these stoats stay on Orkney. And furthermore, there's nothing to stop the stoat population. There's nothing to stop it. We have very few buzzards, we have very few eagles, we have no foxes. So the population will just explode until it runs out of food. So we decided that we would start an eradication project and started our partnership of the 3 partners. The first thing we did was a feasibility study. Is it possible to eradicate stoats from Orkney? Furthermore, is it possible to keep them off, bearing in mind that we don't know how they got to Orkney in the first place? So we got an independent expert to come in and do the feasibility study, because we all knew what answer we wanted. We wanted to get on and carry out the eradication, but it was important that someone independent looked at it. And they said, yes, it's possible, and it's possible to keep them off of Orkney. We then did an assessment of the impact on native wildlife, which was important before any public monies were spent. All things that we might not worry about so much in Sweden, or if we're part of Norway. So we determined there would be long-term and dramatic impacts on our native species. But then we had to do an assessment of the social feasibility. So Orkney has got 21,500 people, but it's a heavily agricultural area and people rely on the land. So it was really important that we looked at whether people wanted the eradication. So what we did, this took a lot longer than looking at the impact on native wildlife and the feasibility study, was we went round on a roadshow to all the 20 inhabited islands. We took a questionnaire out and we put a questionnaire everywhere in Orkney where people would be stuck, in doctors and ferry waiting rooms and everywhere you could think of. And we were asking people their opinion about whether they thought the eradication should happen, how important they thought native wildlife was to Orkney, all sorts of questions like that. We got about 4% of the population came back to us, and 92% thought that we had a duty to protect wildlife, and 84% thought that it was important to eradicate stoats to do so. So we used that as saying that we had a social mandate to actually get on and deliver the project. So that's what this pie chart is. We also asked people what sort of things they wanted to do to engage with the project, because like everyone here we've been hearing about today, we wanted to have a lot of community participation. And a lot of people came back with they wanted to trap stoats, they want to monitor stoats, they want to monitor native wildlife. And we used that information to design the project. We also trialled lessons at schools. We developed lesson programs with the schools, and we got a lot of feedback from that, which we used again to develop the project. But not many people have tried to eradicate stoats in Europe, and Orkney's a bit different again. So we had an initial feasibility study. It suggested a methodology which we needed at the time for the funders, but we then did a year-round trial of traps, baits and lures and monitoring methods for stoats, so that we start working out where we're catching stoats, what are we catching with best, what baits work best. And this is just an example where we had out 3 trial areas, 5 kilometres squared each, and we had traps out simply in a network. And we were using DOC 200 traps. I don't know if any of you are familiar with them. They're New Zealand traps. We didn't have many options because most of the traps were coming off the spring trap approval order for humaneness reasons. So we had to use a trap that we knew had passed. So we ended up with the DOC traps. We're also using good nature traps in the project. We found some very interesting things. We were only catching stoats in the moorland and in the coastal areas and the rough grassland. We weren't catching stoats in the improved fields at all, even though we've got 1,500 people constantly citing that they're in the improved fields. It's just because they can see them in the improved fields. We learned that. We also looked at different baits, and we found at different times of year different baits work better. So eggs worked well in spring and summertime when there are eggs around in the natural habitat. They didn't work very well in autumn and winter time. Rabbit worked better then. So we also found that dried rabbit started to work quite well in the summertime when maybe it was a bit too hot. So a lot of these things we have used to design our methodology. So the other thing that we work very hard on, and this is where I'd love to be part of Norway, is a land access protocol. So we started very early on with stakeholders, with the NFUS in our case, with the Scottish Agricultural College, with the Agricultural Department, trying to develop a land access protocol that would be acceptable to people. We then trialled it with over 100 landowners in the trapping trial and also in some biosecurity trapping we were doing. And we then had lots of revisions till we got to a land access agreement that seemed to work. We trialled it with 100 people and everything seemed to be okay, no problems. I'll come back to that one. So we used all this development work, which was done over about a 9-month period, to develop our project. And yes, we're carrying out a methodology to eradicate stoats. We're being very clear that we're carrying out a methodology because it is the largest stoat eradication in the world, and there's many multitude of reasons why it might not work. We're also monitoring the native wildlife in the project so that we can document the impact of the project on the native wildlife. But also one of the big things we're dealing with at the moment is biosecurity measures. So I said at the start, we're not in a period of stasis here. Stoats are spreading and highly likely to spread to all the islands. So we've got two parts to the biosecurity. It's stopping the spread and then in the long term, stopping stoats from coming back to Orkney. And then we're actively engaging every person of every age in the project who wants to, from 2-year-olds right up to people who maybe can't get out of their house. So we're at the end of year 1 right now. It's a 5-year project. It's a £7 million project. Most of that funding, as I said, is NLHF and EU Life. So where have we got to in the first year? So we've recruited 29 staff posts. We've had to hire a new office. We've had to kit out a new office. We've had to buy tons of equipment. We've had to put in place loads of procedures. We've had habitat regs appraisals that we've had to do. We've had to put in place whole new health and safety things because actually the sort of work we're doing, we don't have health and safety procedures for in any of the partner organisations yet. So we had to put together new procedures. We've had a database built because we're going to have trillions of records coming in. We've set up an independent technical advisory group, and we're currently building a mathematical model that is going to be used to analyse our data to actually change the methodology and predict the time to eradication. So, in terms of the eradication, you'll see here in the middle, in all 3 pictures, those are the dock traps. The ones you can see here are double entrance traps. We found that they caught far more stoats than single entrance traps with 1 trap in. So we've got double entrance with 2 traps inside. They're designed with a very small baffle to minimise bycatch. They've been specially designed in New Zealand. These extended designs are used where they've got weka, and we've obviously got native rails, we've got water rails and things like that. So we've used the precautionary extended design. So we bought 19,000 dock traps from New Zealand. There is only one supplier of one manufacturer of dock traps in the world, and we have been onto the phone to them so many times saying, "Where's our traps? Where's our traps?" And of course, in New Zealand, they got predator-free 2050, so they've got tons of orders for traps from New Zealand as well. We contracted a builder who's now built us 10,000 boxes to put these traps in. We've employed 10 trappers and 2 eradication operation managers, and we have so far secured 700 land access agreements across Orkney, and that has taken us a long time. We're currently deploying traps. We've got about 2,300 out at the moment, out of 7,000, and I would love to beam everyone in this room up to Orkney for a month and just say, come on, let's go and put out traps because we might fill the giant hole. At the moment, we've been putting the traps out on the designated sites, and it has been a real challenge. These traps are heavy, and the designated sites are really rough ground and they're remote. So the trapping team are knackered. So we've been, where the trap deployment has basically been driven by our land access, because we don't have access to all the land on Orkney yet. So here we've got a guy just setting a trap, a pretty standard place in a road verge. And we're using these handy little trap carriers that they use in New Zealand as well to carry the traps. So what do? So the eradicated methodology is that we don't know the home range of stoats, so we've assumed the smallest European home range. To stop now and to look at stoat home range means that we risk stoats going to more islands, when it's quite frankly not worth it. So precautionary, we assume we've got a small home range. So we've got traps every 250 metres in suitable habitat, and we know from the trapping trial that suitable habitat is moorland, rough grassland and coastal edge. So that works out as 7,000 dock traps across the Orkney mainland and the link tiles, and we've got about 1,000 good nature traps that are going out as well. So 80% of the traps are double entrance, but we're also using single entrance traps as well, just to mix it up a bit, because you've got to use every tool that you've got in the book if you want to eradicate. So we go through this process. The trappers, we have a rough idea about how many traps we have to put in an area. The trappers go out, they decide what's a good trap route and where's the good habitat to put the traps, and then off they go and put them out, and then we come back, all the GPS points come back, and we basically put a home range buffer around every single trap, and we look at the traps on a habitat map and say, are there any gaps that are a problem? So in this area, we've actually got the traps active in this area. The red areas we don't yet have access to, so the landowners are refusing us access for traps. But in this case, the technical advisory group have said, well, we think you've got enough land to eradicate. Stoats are quite wide-ranging, and a lot of the gaps are very improved farmlands. They don't even have buffer areas, so, you know, it's fine. Go ahead. And what we intend to do is we check the traps every 3 weeks. So they're not live traps. We don't need to check them every day. And you can imagine if we had 7,000 traps that we were checking every day, we'd need an army. That wasn't going to happen. So we check them every 3 weeks, but our model will tell us whether the traps are blocking too much in that 3-week period by the time we go back and check the traps. And then we have this as a knockdown phase. We try and get rid of 95% of the population. And then we go into a mop-up phase, and that's when we throw everything at it to get the last remaining stoats. Okay, so that's where we are with that. And in terms of what we're catching, we're getting results that are very similar to the trapping trial. We're catching stoats on coastal areas, and we're catching stoats in moorland. So we've only got 573 traps active at the moment. We've caught 42 stoats since September and 1,000 rats. So it's been fun scraping them off. We're carefully looking at the bycatch of the project. But the other big thing I mentioned was biosecurity. So we're focusing at the moment on stopping stoats spreading to other islands. So we're working with all the islands within a swimming distance of the Orkney mainland, and we're getting together biosecurity plans with those islands. So we have a dedicated biosecurity officer who's doing that. We also have a network of traps out on all the islands, and we put out monitoring tunnels, and we have so far, touch wood, that's not wood, there is no wood, touch my head, we haven't actually got any stoats found on any of the other islands yet. So that's Orkney mainland in the middle that you can see there. We've got traps out on the coastal edges of it as well. We have actually caught 200 stoats in the coastal edges of the Orkney mainland. So they're all stoats that might have swum. We've obviously got stoat detection dogs, so you've already heard that we've got Cryos training 6 dogs for us. They'll largely be checking cargo coming into Orkney, so we can develop a long-term biosecurity plan. They are checking islands, for populations of stoats because it is so difficult to tell whether you have no stoats on an island, and they're going to be checking the Orkney mainland to find the last remaining stoats. So I think our dogs are going to get driving licenses, aren't they? So the dogs are due to come in April. We've already recruited three dog handlers for the post. And obviously in the long term, we're looking at preventing stoats from coming to Orkney. But the important thing is we're going to assess the risks first because we don't know how they came in. As I said, we're monitoring native wildlife. I'm running out of time, so I'll just whiz through that. We've got a monitoring officer. Every year we've got 4 seasonal staff, and we've got a programme of monitoring that is on islands with and without stoats. And we're looking at meadow pipit, skylark, and Orkney vole, which is an endemic subspecies. We're looking at wader productivity, and we're looking at wader populations. And we're finding some differences. We're finding that vole recruitment is far higher on the islands where there are no stoats than it is on the Orkney mainland. And we're also already finding that wader chick survival is higher on the islands than it is on the Orkney mainland. And then we've got a huge education programme. So the schools have really taken this and they love it. And they actually all want to help us actively deliver the project. So we're midway through lessons. We've had 1,700 kids sit through lessons so far, and now they're going on to active project delivery. And community engagement, absolutely essential. And so we've got stands at shows. We're now moving into a training programme. So we're training people in trapping, wildlife monitoring, and biosecurity. And we've got kit that we can give to people to use. Project expenditure, about half of it is staff, but the rest of it is equipment, office costs, travel. It's by no means all about the eradication, though. And finally, just lessons learned. I mean, this project, I've been involved in a lot of projects, and I have been involved in quite a few eradications. For me, this one's been the most stressful because we're not in that period of stasis, and we're just having to move so quickly. So whereas you'd normally say, let's delay, we can't delay, and that's been really difficult. And however thorough you think your community consultation is, there's always going to be a bogey. So we trialled our land access with over 100 landowners, but in the interim of about 3 months between the end of that and the start of the project, the Scottish Government removed the funding for goose management. And that was it. We've had absolute bedlam since then. So people will not give us access because they want the money to be spent on reducing the number of grey-lag geese. And that's still something that we're dealing with. So maybe if raccoon dogs eat grey-lag geese eggs, maybe we'll have them. Project management is essential. Our tag, it really manages the risk for the project for us. And we all need to have good terms and conditions so everyone knows where they are in the decision-making process. And always allow extra time. We thought we'd made enough time for the development and for the land access, and we found that that's not enough time. And people are always the loveliest bit, but the most challenging bit of any eradication project. Thank you.